Welcome back to another story on Whispered Tales. Now, let's dive into today's story.
The Equity after 60 years. Night fell over the city like a damp, musty blanket. The rain didn't pour. It lingered, quietly threading through every crack, clinging to the taxi's windshield, smearing the glow of the neon lights along the riverfront. Daniel Grant pulled his worn wool coat tighter around his shoulders and coaxed the slow heater of his yellow checker cab to life. The fan wheezed like an asthmatic old man, breathing just enough warmth to keep the windshield from fogging over. On the sun visor was a small black and white photo. Deborah, his late wife, smiling with her hair curled in a soft 1970s wave. He had once promised to replace that faded picture with a colored one, but she was gone, and the promise had drifted into silence. "Rainy nights are good for fares," called Tommy, the lot attendant, as he closed the ledger and waved him out. "Stay warm, Grant. Those drunk kids out there don't have patience for an old man who drives slow." Daniel smiled, the polite, weary smile of someone too tired to argue. He reset the meter, glanced into the rearview mirror. The eyes staring back were cloudy now, veined with fine red lines, yet still held a stubborn gentleness. He shifted gears. The taxi shuddered, coughed once, and rolled out onto Franklin Street. A few weeks earlier, in a rain just like this, he had stood on his own front porch holding a duffel bag and a tin box filled with old letters. Michael, his eldest son, blocked the doorway, arms folded, eyes both firm and avoiding. Evan stood behind him, adjusting the strap on his new wristwatch, not meeting his father's gaze. "I can't afford to keep you here anymore, Dad," Michael said flatly. "We're all exhausted after the funeral. You need time, and we need space." That word, space, fell from his son's lips like a slogan on an office wall, smooth, polished, and hollow. Daniel remembered only nodding. He hadn't mentioned Deborah's frugal dinners, nor the winters he'd carried the family through with overtime shifts. He'd simply walked down the 3 steps, brushing his hand along the wooden railing as though touching a memory. When the door slammed behind him, the bolt clicked shut with a sound too clean, too final. That same week, he sold his old Chevy and signed up with a small taxi company on Canal Street. His license was still valid. The young drivers eyed him oddly, a relic among boys chasing speed and rock music. He didn't argue. All he needed was a steering wheel, a seat, and a small space to pin Deborah's picture. "Deb, I'm driving now," he whispered each night as the engine turned over. Driving, he told himself, kept his hands busy and his mind from withering. Tonight, the mingled smell of wet vinyl and metal reminded him of the warehouses where he'd worked in his youth. Coils of wire, lime, the raw scent of honest labor. He had once imagined that by 70 he'd be drinking tea in the garden, fixing that old creaky rocker, telling stories to grandchildren. But Deborah was gone. His sons had locked him out of their home. And so here he sat, listening to soft AM music dissolve into the tapping of rain. The county hospital loomed ahead on a hill, its brick walls blotched and weary, its windows reflecting the rain like the eyes of a tired giant. Daniel pulled to the emergency entrance. 2 nurses were pushing a gurney. One waved at him. "Cab free," she called. "Yes, ma'am," Daniel answered, stepping out to open the rear door. He tilted his broken umbrella toward an elderly man in a wheelchair. Upright posture, neck thin as a string. His complexion was pale, eyes calm and gray-blue, his charcoal wool suit still precise, as if habit itself kept him together. On his lapel clip were the initials AM. "Where to, sir?" Daniel asked quietly. "Not far," the man rasped, voice like stone against a stair. "217 Mill Street. The old workshop. Take the river road. I don't like the freeway." Daniel helped him into the cab, folded the wheelchair into the trunk, then returned to his seat. In the rearview mirror, he caught the man holding a thick envelope, its edges worn soft. "Start the meter, driver," the old man said. Half a joke, half an order. Daniel pressed the button. The meter clicked once, an indifferent tack. The taxi eased down the hill. Behind them, the hospital lights faded like embers in a dying fire. The river road under rain looked as though someone had spilled ink over the water. Low bridges, damp wooden posts, silent warehouses. Daniel drove slowly, cautious of slick tires. The passenger coughed. Daniel turned the radio down. A crooner's voice drifted from decades ago, a song about returning too late. It stitched the silence between them like a thin thread of wool. "What's your name?" the man asked. "Daniel Grant, sir." "Grant," he murmured, as if searching for a lost key. "How old are you, Grant?" 70, Daniel replied, pressing his lips tight. "Still drive fine. My eyes are good, even at night." "I believe that," the man said, eyes glinting faintly. 70. "Good. What about family?" "My wife passed away," Daniel said slowly. "A few weeks ago. My sons are busy." He didn't add threw me out of their house. That sounded too bitter, and bitterness wasn't his way. Outside, rain tapped softly on the roof like a knock from another room in his memory. "I'm sorry," the man said gently. "At our age, losing your companion feels like a door closing in an empty house." "Yes," Daniel breathed in. The mingled scent of old leather and damp air filled his lungs. "But I like to think she's still here." He tapped the small photo on the visor. "Just in another place." Silence moved through the cab like a passing shadow. Then the man spoke again. "You follow the construction business much these days, Grant? Companies, shares, profits, those things." "I used to haul materials for a crew," Daniel said. "These days I just listen to the radio. Real estate booms, crashes, interest rates dancing like mad." The man chuckled softly. "Exactly." They turned onto Mill Street, an aging stretch lined with red brick factories, smokestacks now breathing only cold air. A faded wooden sign hung crookedly, "Monroe Builders and Company." The letters barely legible. Daniel glanced at the mirror. The passenger was staring at the sign, eyes fixed not on the present, but somewhere 4 decades behind. "I'll be just a moment," the man said as the cab stopped. "Can you wait?" "Of course, sir." Daniel cut the engine, but kept the keys in. He reached for the umbrella, ready to help, but the man waved him off. "I can still walk," he said with the stubborn pride of someone long used to giving orders. Under the dim cabin light, the old man's face glowed pale, revealing a faint scar at his temple. He inhaled deeply, clutched the envelope to his chest, opened the door, and stepped out into the rain. The padlock on the workshop door was rusted. From his coat pocket he drew a ring of mismatched keys, fumbled, then, click. He disappeared inside, door closing behind him. In the cab, Daniel rested his hands on the steering wheel, listening to the patter of rain, the faint scent of damp timber drifting from the old shop. He thought of Deborah, of her at the breakfast table smiling over small newspaper clippings. "Danny," she used to say, "everyone carries a locked room inside them. Whether it opens or not depends on how you knock." He smiled faintly. "Deb, which room is knocking on me tonight?" 15 minutes passed. Daniel began to worry. He was about to step out when the man returned, carrying a small black metal box, paint-chipped, heavy for its size. He set it on his lap, exhaled, and gestured to Daniel. "Thank you for waiting, Grant." "Back to the hospital?" "No, to McKinnon's office, State Street. The lights will still be on." Daniel nodded, restarted the engine. The meter clicked again, another indifferent tack, as if opening a new hand of cards. As the car turned, the man spoke suddenly. "Henry Grant." The 2 words fell into the cab like a coin dropping into a tin box. Daniel froze, his voice barely steady. "Sir, how do you know that name?" The old man didn't answer right away. He traced the edge of the envelope, where the paper was worn smooth. "Many years ago," he said finally, "there was a mechanic named Henry Grant. He saved my company from bankruptcy. $35,000, everything he had. I promised him 25% ownership. Then, life happened. He disappeared. He paused, as if stepping carefully over a broken stair. "I grew old, and I don't want to take that promise to my grave." Daniel felt his heartbeat beneath the sound of rain. Memories flickered, his father's cracked hammer, grease-stained fingers, the smell of gasoline in the yard, Deborah's voice telling that story about a stranger at their door arguing with Henry late one night. He remembered hiding behind the curtain, watching shadows stretch across the carpet. "Sir," Daniel swallowed. "My father's name was Henry Grant." Anne's gray-blue eyes rose slowly, meeting Daniel's reflection. No shock, just a quiet acknowledgement, as if he had been waiting for those words. Outside, rain streaked the glass like time itself running down. "I'm Albert Monroe," the man said softly, like a confession. "Grant, Daniel, isn't it? I'm sorry for many things. But tonight, perhaps I can set one right." He patted the metal box on his lap. This is the old safe I kept hidden. Inside are the papers. Not just words. Daniel didn't reply. He looked ahead. Red lights. Rain. A lone man crossing the street in a fedora. The city seemed to shrink until there was only the taxi, two old men, and a name that had just unlocked a long-sealed door inside him. Henry Grant. The AM radio shifted to a lonely saxophone, stretching the rain into a silken thread. "Mr. Monroe," Daniel said finally, voice trembling but calm. "If what you say is true." He paused, breathed, afraid the words might vanish if spoken too quickly. "If it's true, my father will be smiling somewhere." Albert leaned back, eyes half closed. "I hope so," he whispered. "I owed a man my life, and I owe the rest of the world honesty." He touched the envelope again. "Fairness, at least, before the curtain falls." The streetlights slid across their faces, warping with the rain. Daniel gripped the wheel tighter. A tingling ran down his fingers like a faint current. Pieces of memory clicked together. The year Deborah avoided talking about, the late-night calls his father never answered, the day Henry Grant vanished, leaving behind the smell of oil that lingered for years. The cab turned onto State Street. At the far end, one window still glowed. McKinnon and Associates, attorneys at law. Daniel slowed, watching the brown sign shimmer in the rain. Next door, a 24-hour diner buzzed in blue-white light, a young waiter wiping the counter. Unaware that in the cab outside, an unfinished story was being reopened, like a record resumed halfway through its second side. "Stop here," Albert said. "Grant, help me carry the box, will you? I don't want it to get wet." Daniel pulled over, unlocked the door, and stepped out. Albert handed him the small safe. It was heavier than it looked. His hand, though cold, was steady. "We'll need witnesses," Albert said, "and a few papers signed. But the rest is your story now." Daniel looked down at the box in his hands. Rain beaded on its chipped paint, glinting like tiny bits of metal. He took a long breath, the smell of rust, moisture, and time blending together. From somewhere far away, maybe from a morning long ago, he heard Deborah's voice. "Open the door, Danny." He lifted his eyes. "Yes, Mr. Monroe," he said quietly, steady at last. "Let's go." The wall clock in McKinnon's law office showed a few minutes to 10, yet the city outside was still shimmering with light. The rain had stopped, leaving a faint mist rising from the streets, curling around the yellow glow of the lamps and fogging the tall windows. Daniel stood in the small lobby, hat dripping wet in his hand, shoes heavy with rainwater. Beside him, Albert Monroe clutched the old iron box as if it were a piece of his own decaying life. The man looked frail, almost transparent, but there was something bright and steady in his eyes, a light that only appears when a person has decided, at last, to do the right thing, no matter how late. George McKinnon, the lawyer, entered from an inner room. He was around 60, with silver hair and the posture of a man accustomed to order. His voice was gravelly but kind. "Albert, it's been years since you last came by. You show up at this hour, and with a guest, must be serious business." Albert nodded, his tone slow but firm. "More serious than any contract I've ever signed, George. This is Daniel Grant, son of Henry Grant." McKinnon froze. The name seemed to stir something buried deep in his memory. He studied Daniel for a long moment before speaking. "Henry Grant, the mechanic from that plant explosion back in '70? My God, I remember him. He saved an entire crew that night. I never thought." Albert smiled faintly, exhaustion deepening the lines around his mouth. "He didn't just save lives, George. He saved my company." McKinnon gestured for them to come in. The office was small, paneled in dark wood, carrying the scent of old paper and ink. In the corner, a pendulum clock ticked softly, each swing marking time's quiet indifference. Albert set the iron box on the desk. The dull clang of metal against wood made Daniel shiver. "You still have this old thing?" McKinnon asked, leaning closer. "Good Lord, it must be as old as we are." "Inside," Albert said, voice low, "is something worth more than money. A promise." He pulled a ring of keys from his pocket, found the smallest one, and turned it slowly. The lock screeched, then clicked. The lid creaked open. Inside were documents wrapped in waxed paper, edges yellowed with age. Albert unwrapped them gently, as though afraid to bruise something living. A single parchment lay on top, its red seal still intact, the letters bold though faded. Transfer of 25% ownership of Monroe Builders and Company to Mr. Henry Grant, in recognition of debt and partnership, July 1970. The room went still. Daniel stared at the paper, his hands trembling. The letters wavered through the years, but still cut deep into his heart. He reached out and touched the corner of the page, feeling the wax stick faintly to his skin. It was real, fragile, and eternal all at once. Albert spoke slowly, his breath uneven. Back then I was young, arrogant. Thought I could turn the world on a whim. Then came the crash. The bank wanted its money, and I had only days to pay. Henry walked into the yard carrying $35,000 in a canvas bag, his life savings. McKinnon interjected softly. I remember the talk around town. They said Henry Grant saved Monroe Builders. He did, Albert said, nodding. And I promised him 25%, a share of my life. But then the explosion came. Henry vanished. No body, no goodbye. I buried this paper in that box, telling myself I'd give it to his family someday. But the years passed. Henry was forgotten, and I grew old. The promise rotted inside me. Daniel couldn't speak. His throat tightened as his father's image came flooding back. Those strong hands stained with oil, the calm voice teaching him how to tighten a bolt, just right, not too hard. He remembered the last night Henry left home with his leather briefcase, saying he had unfinished business with an old friend. He never came back. Now the final piece of his father's story sat on the desk before him, in a rusted box, but shining with truth. McKinnon cleared his throat, bringing them back to the present. Albert, if you wish to formalize this inheritance, I'll need to record a new transfer of ownership and verify Daniel's relation to Henry Grant. Albert nodded. I understand. And I want it done tonight. Tonight? McKinnon raised an eyebrow. Yes, said Albert, his eyes sharp as steel. I don't know if I'll still be breathing by morning. No one spoke after that. McKinnon brought out a fresh stack of papers, clean and white. His hands trembled slightly as he opened the bottle of red ink. Albert signed each page slowly, every letter carved into the paper like pennants. When the seal finally came down with a firm thump, the sound filled the room. Heavy, final, and oddly freeing. Daniel looked up. It felt like hearing a door in the past close for good. Albert set the pen aside, exhaled. I'm not doing this out of pity, Daniel. I'm doing it because a man keeps his word to another man. Your father gave me a chance to save my name. I can't let him be remembered as a ghost. Daniel bowed his head. His voice was thin but steady. My father always said a man's worth is measured by his word, sir. Thank you for proving he was right. Albert smiled faintly. Call me Albert. From now on, we're two men carrying one legacy. The next morning, Daniel went to the hospital for a DNA test, as McKinnon had requested. The young nurse smiled as she drew his blood. Mr. Grant, your family must be proud of you. Maybe, Daniel said softly. I just want them to understand that living decently is never wasted. Outside, the sky had cleared. Sunlight pooled on the wet pavement, turning the street into a mirror of gold and glass. Daniel stopped at a corner cafe and ordered a black coffee. He took out Deborah's old photo, the one where she was laughing with her eyes half closed. Deb, he whispered, maybe I'm finally paying the debt Dad carried all his life. That afternoon, McKinnon called. The results will be ready in a few days, Daniel. Everything else is in order. Mr. Monroe says he's at peace now. The lawyer paused, voice softening. He's very weak. You might want to visit. Later that day, Daniel returned to the hospital. Albert lay on his side, and Ford dripping steadily beside him. His skin had gone pale, yet his smile was the same, tired but content. Grant, you came, he whispered. Yes. They said you weren't well. Old bones, Albert murmured. But I'm happy. Slept better last night than I have in years. Daniel took his hand. The papers will be finalized soon. You can rest easy. Albert nodded slowly. Daniel, I have no family left. My son died in a plane crash years ago. Money, fame, business, none of it filled the emptiness. The only thing that keeps me human now is making things right. He paused to catch his breath. I've created a trust, the Henry Grant Foundation. A portion of the profits from those shares will fund scholarships for the children of construction workers. I want you to manage it. Will you promise me that, Daniel? Daniel felt his throat tighten, his eyes burning. I promise, Albert. For my father, and for you. Albert smiled. the sunlight falling gently across his lined face, making it look almost young again. "Good," he said, closing his eyes. "Then I can rest." Daniel sat quietly, listening to the steady rhythm of the monitors. He understood, then, that redemption didn't always need an audience. Sometimes it was just one signature, one kept promise, one man's decision to end the story right. When he finally left the room, the daylight had dimmed. The corridor lights glowed a sterile white. Daniel stopped at the window, watching the drizzle return, thin and silver. His heart felt heavy and light all at once, like a weight that had finally found its place. In his pocket was the newly signed certificate, now bearing his father's name and his own. He clenched his hand gently around it and looked up into the gray sky. "Dad," he whispered, "your justice has come home, and I won't let it die again." Outside, the city murmured with the hum of distant traffic. Rain fell soft and clean, like forgiveness. The morning sun crept through thin curtains, pale and quiet, as the city slowly awakened from the long rain. Its light fell across Daniel's small desk, where an open newspaper lay folded in half. The headline at the bottom of the page read, "Businessman Albert Monroe, a titan of construction, dies peacefully at 84. Daniel read the line again and again. Beneath the article was a photo of Albert in his younger days. Dark hair, proud eyes, the confidence of a man who once believed he could build the world. Beside it, a single sentence. He passed away peacefully, leaving behind a career and a rare legacy of integrity. Daniel folded the paper. His hand trembled slightly. What he felt wasn't grief that shouted, but a deep, still silence, a quiet lake of understanding. The man who had carried his guilt like a cross had finally laid it down. And Daniel, once just a lonely cab driver, had become the witness to a long overdue redemption. The telephone rang. McKinnon's familiar voice came through, steady and respectful. "Mr. Grant, my condolences. Albert Monroe passed peacefully last night. Before he went, he signed an amended will naming you as the rightful heir to his 25% share of Monroe Builders and as trustee of the Henry Grant Foundation. I'd like you to come in for the formal reading." Daniel paused a few seconds, then said quietly, "I'll be there." McKinnon's office glowed warmly under the midday light. The scent of coffee, polished wood, and fresh paper filled the air. Outside, the glass towers shimmered in the sun, reminders that the city, unlike men, never stops moving. Inside, McKinnon placed a thick folder before Daniel, its brown leather cover smooth and weighty. He adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses and began to read, his voice calm but solemn. "I, Albert James Monroe, being of sound mind and clear intention, declare the following. I acknowledge Daniel Henry Grant as the son of Henry Grant, the man who saved Monroe Builders from bankruptcy in July of 1970. I hereby transfer to Mr. Daniel Grant the full 25% ownership of Monroe Builders and Company, the rightful share originally promised to Henry Grant, including all dividends and voting rights. Furthermore, I direct that a portion of Monroe Builders' annual profits be committed to the Henry Grant Foundation, dedicated to supporting education and welfare for the children of construction workers. The foundation shall be managed by Mr. Daniel Grant. I do not ask for gratitude. I ask only to rest knowing that a promise has been kept." When McKinnon reached the final line, Daniel could hear the slow, deliberate rhythm of his own heartbeat. A promise has been kept. The words seemed to hang in the air, like an echo in an empty church. McKinnon closed the folder and looked at him. "Everything's in order now, Mr. Grant. The shares, the trust, the foundation, it's all legally yours." Daniel said nothing for a while. His thoughts drifted through decades, his father's oil-stained hands, Deborah's laughter in the morning light, Albert's trembling hands signing the final papers. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, rough with emotion. "It's not mine, George. It's my father's. I'm just the man holding it for him." McKinnon smiled gently. "Perhaps that's exactly why Albert chose you." News of the transfer spread fast. The press couldn't resist the story. Cab driver becomes major shareholder in Monroe Builders. Rumors bloomed. Some said Daniel was Albert's secret son. Others whispered it was hush money for an old scandal. Daniel ignored them all. He avoided cameras, turned down interviews, and kept working quietly through the paperwork. When everything was signed, He returned to his small rented apartment on the old side of town. That evening, he found a letter waiting in his mailbox. White envelope, handwriting neat and slanted. It was unmistakably Albert's. Daniel, if you're reading this, it means I've gone. Don't let the noise of the world drown out what truly matters. Money is only a tool for a man to preserve his dignity. Live as your father lived, honest, simple, and kind. I believe in you. Albert Monroe. By the time Daniel reached the final line, tears had already blurred the ink. He folded the letter and placed it in his wallet beside Deborah's photo. Deb, he whispered, smiling through the tears. See? The world still has a little fairness left. Weeks later, Daniel attended his first board meeting as a shareholder of Monroe Builders. The conference room gleamed with chrome and glass. Young executives watched him with curiosity and caution. A silver-haired man at the head of the table spoke first. Mr. Grant, welcome. You're now a major stakeholder. May I ask, do you plan to sell your shares? The board would prefer to consolidate ownership. Daniel met his gaze evenly. I didn't come here to sell. I came to protect what my father earned. And I'll continue running the Henry Grant Foundation, just as the will states. The room fell silent for a moment. Papers rustled. Then a young woman, head of human resources, spoke softly. My father used to tell me stories about Henry Grant. He said he was a good man. We're honored to work with his son. Daniel nodded, the corners of his eyes softening. In the sterile white light, his silver hair seemed to glow faintly. For the first time in years, he felt his father close, not as a memory, but as a quiet strength breathing through him. That afternoon, Daniel drove to the riverfront, the place where his father once had a small workshop. The old row of red brick buildings still stood, faded and cracked. He stopped before the lot where Henry's workbench had once been. The ground was covered in wild grass now, the scent of rust and river wind mingling in the air. He bent down and picked up a single rusted bolt half buried in the dirt, maybe a relic from the 1970s. Turning it in his hand, he traced the ridges etched by time. Dad, he whispered, everything you built is still here. It just changed its shape. He looked across the river. The new Monroe Builders tower rose tall and gleaming, its mirrored windows catching the sunset. At the top, the golden M logo shimmered, reflecting, perhaps, the spirits of two men. One who had kept his promise, and one who had finally been vindicated. Daniel walked back to his old taxi parked by the curb. He had no intention of giving up driving, even now that he could live comfortably for the rest of his days. Maybe I still need to drive, he thought. Every road I take, every person I meet, reminds me, integrity can't be bought, but it can be passed on. He started the engine. The familiar rasp of the motor filled the quiet street. Deborah's photo trembled gently on the visor. Deb, I'm driving now, he said softly. And this time, I'm not alone. The taxi rolled forward, merging into the flow of the evening. Streetlights flickered on, warm, golden, like memories being lit again. On the passenger seat lay the share certificate, its edges catching the glow, a silent symbol of a promise finally fulfilled after half a century. Late afternoon. The rain had returned, soft and hesitant, brushing against the window like a gentle memory unwilling to fade. Daniel sat in his modest office at the Henry Grant Foundation, watching the drizzle blur the park across the street. The sound of rain was comforting now, steady, familiar, almost like an old friend who still kept in touch. On his desk were neatly stacked scholarship applications, each one a story of struggle and hope. Across the top page, in crisp, bold letters, was the foundation's motto: to support the children of construction workers, because dignity is never cheap. Daniel had just finished signing a grant of $50,000 for a group of students from the outskirts. Each time he put his pen to paper for someone else's future, he felt a small weight lifting from his heart, like a debt his father had once carried being slowly repaid, piece by piece. A knock came at the door. Mary, his young secretary, peeked in. Mr. Grant, there are two gentlemen asking to see you. They insist they're family. Daniel looked up. Names? Michael and Evan Grant, sir. The room seemed to grow still. Daniel set down his pen, his gaze drifting to the framed photo of Deborah beside the clock. He exhaled softly, almost as if he had expected this day to come. Send them in, he said. The door opened. Michael entered first, still impeccably dressed in a gray suit, hair slicked back, confidence carefully arranged on his face. Evan followed behind, simpler in a wool jacket, thinner than before, his eyes quieter. For a few seconds, both sons stood wordless, taking in the sight of their father behind a polished desk, nameplate gleaming on the glass door. No longer the frail old man driving through wet nights, but someone different, upright, composed, his silver hair glowing faintly under the light. "Dad," Michael began, voice low and uncertain. We saw the news. We couldn't believe it. You really inherited Monroe Builders." Daniel nodded. "The news is true." Evan spoke next, almost in a whisper. "We didn't know anything about Grandpa, or that you worked with Mr. Monroe." Daniel studied their faces. No anger, no indulgence, just the calm of someone who'd already made peace with the past. "You didn't know," he said quietly, "because you never asked. And maybe because I never had the courage to tell you." Silence filled the room. Outside, the rain thickened, tapping gently on the glass. Michael took a seat opposite him, clasping his hands together. "Dad, we're not here for money. I feel terrible about what we did." Daniel tilted his head slightly. "Do you?" "Feeling bad doesn't undo what's been done, son." His tone wasn't sharp, but it cut clean through the air. Evan looked up, his eyes moist. "Dad, that day, I was wrong. I was scared. After Mom died, everything fell apart. I thought if we kept our space, we could keep things under control. But I was just running away." Daniel nodded slowly. "Losing your mother was like losing part of our home. But instead of holding on to what was left, you both pushed it out the door." Michael lowered his head. "I'm sorry." Daniel stood and walked to a small cabinet. From it, he took a blue folder and laid it on the table before them. "This," he said, "is a copy of Albert Monroe's will and the founding papers for the Henry Grant Foundation. I didn't create this to spend money. I created it to give back my father's dignity, your grandfather's." Evan leaned forward, reading the words carefully. "Scholarships, housing aid, for the children of construction workers." He smiled faintly. "You're really giving it all away, Dad?" Daniel nodded. "Money means nothing if it just sits in an account. I've seen too many men die rich, but live small. I chose another way." Michael spoke softly. "You could use help. A manager, an assistant." "I could." Daniel looked straight into his eyes, calm but firm. "Do you want to help me, Michael, or help yourself?" Michael froze. The question, though gentle, hit deep. Daniel continued, voice softer now. "I don't blame you, son, but I won't pretend. I'm not the poor old man waiting at the door anymore. I'm Daniel Grant, the man trying to live rightly, the way my father would have wanted." Evan's voice trembled slightly. "Dad, if you'll let me, I'd like to work for the foundation. Not for money. I work in construction. I know what those men go through. I want to help." Daniel looked at his younger son for a long moment. In those eyes, he saw something genuine, something that looked a little like hope. "All right," he said at last. "But you'll start like everyone else. No title, no privilege. Just another worker. We'll begin again." Evan nodded, eyes bright. Michael was silent for a while, then said softly, "Dad, I need time to figure out who I am." Daniel smiled faintly. "Time is the only thing we can't buy, son. Use it well." That evening, after his sons had gone, Daniel stepped out onto the balcony. The rain had stopped, and the river breeze carried a faint chill. He sat in his wooden chair, holding a warm cup of tea, watching the city lights flicker awake. From somewhere far away came the hum of traffic, the sound of life continuing. He thought of his sons when they were small. Michael, the bold one, always leading. Evan, quieter, following his mother around the kitchen, covered in flour. They had once promised never to let their father grow old alone. But childhood promises are fragile, like dew on morning grass. One touch, and they vanish. Now, sitting in the calm after the storm, Daniel realized something profound. Forgiveness doesn't erase pain. It simply lets you walk past it. He didn't need them to kneel, to apologize again, or to fix the past. He only needed them to see what he'd become and to understand that true worth isn't in wealth, but in how one carries themselves when everything else is gone. The street lamps below flickered to life, their light reflected on the framed photo of Deborah resting on his desk. He reached out, touched the glass gently, and whispered, "Deb, can you see them? Our boys. Maybe they're finally learning what it means to be good men." He sat there for a long time, until the night wind carried away the scent of tea, wood, and the faint ache in his chest. Through the office window, the sign Henry Grant Foundation glowed softly, its reflection shimmering in the glass. And there, beneath that light, an old man sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the city that had finally remembered what dignity looked like. Summer morning, 1988. The sky was gold and endless, sunlight spilling across the new high-rises downtown like sheets of fire. From the 12th floor of Monroe Builders headquarters, Daniel Grant stood by the window, looking down at the river and the restless tide of people below. A year ago, he had been an old cab driver in the rain, anonymous, invisible. Now, they called him the gentleman shareholder, a symbol, they said, of honesty and decency in business. But Daniel knew better. There is no light without a shadow, and the shadow was coming. That day's board meeting felt different, thicker somehow, the air heavy with anticipation. On the table were thick binders full of charts, numbers, projections, and one bold proposal. The Grand River Complex, luxury development along the Riverside District. The CEO, Charles Denton, a middle-aged man with sleek hair and a gold watch that gleamed like armor, stood before the board, smiling with corporate confidence. "Gentlemen and ladies," he began, "this project will quadruple profits in 3 years. We'll transform the old Riverside warehouses into high-end towers. All we need is the clearance to relocate about 300 residents from the area." A murmur of approval circled the table. Several young shareholders nodded, their eyes shining at the numbers on the page. Daniel said nothing. He simply stared at the map spread before him. He knew that riverbank. He could almost smell the damp wood and metal of his father's old workshop. Those residents were construction workers, families, retirees, the very people the Henry Grant Foundation was built to protect. He looked up slowly. "Those 300 families," he said evenly, "work for this company. If we take their homes, we're tearing down the very foundation Monroe Builders was built on, loyalty." The room went silent for a heartbeat. Then Charles laughed lightly. "Mr. Grant, I respect your sentiment. But business isn't charity. They'll be compensated according to the law. And with these profits, your foundation could expand tenfold." Daniel met his gaze. His voice was quiet but firm. "My foundation exists to honor promises, not to wash away greed." A few whispers broke the silence. Charles's smile tightened. "Mr. Grant," he said smoothly, "the world has changed. This isn't 1970 anymore. Henry Grant's time is over. Ours is the age of numbers." Daniel rose slowly from his chair. "Then count this," he said. "My vote is no." The meeting ended in a tense hush. The next morning, the newspapers erupted. Shareholder Daniel Grant blocks billion-dollar project. Taxi driver turned philanthropist causes rift in Monroe Builders boardroom. Some called him brave, others called him senile. Rumors spread like mold. Claims that he was being manipulated, that he didn't understand modern economics. Daniel ignored it all. He had faced colder nights and harsher silences before. But what he didn't expect was the visit from his own son. That morning, Michael arrived at the office. Impeccable suit, tense shoulders, eyes shadowed by worry. "Dad," he said, "I've spoken with several board members. They're furious. If you don't change your stance, they'll move to push you out. You could lose everything, your seat, your reputation, even the foundation." Daniel listened quietly, then smiled faintly. "If keeping my seat means betraying what I stand for, I'd rather lose it." Michael's voice cracked. "You don't understand. They'll destroy you, Dad. The media, the money, everything you've built, it'll all be gone. Be realistic for once." Daniel looked at his son, eyes steady and kind. "Realistic," he repeated softly. "Reality, son, is this. I've already lost everything once. I've been thrown out, forgotten, hungry. I've driven through nights so cold I couldn't feel my hands. What's left to fear?" Michael's anger faded, replaced by something smaller, almost childlike. "I just don't want to see you hurt again." Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. "No, Michael. I've been quiet my whole life. This time, I'm just saying what's right, even if nobody wants to hear it." The day of the vote arrived. The boardroom was packed. Members, reporters, even McKinnon, the old lawyer, sitting quietly in the back. Cameras flashed behind glass walls. Charles Denton stood at the front, voice slick as oil. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have before us an opportunity for transformation. The Grand River Complex will define our future. I trust this board will vote with reason, not emotion. He gestured toward Daniel. Mr. Grant, would you like to make a statement? Daniel rose, buttoning his coat with slow precision. The room fell silent. 18 years ago, he began. A man named Henry Grant, my father, saved this company, not with money, but with trust. He believed Monroe Builders stood for more than profit, for fairness, dignity, and respect for working people. He looked around the table, his voice gaining strength. If we bulldoze those homes to build glass towers, then every promise that built this company dies with it. And when a promise dies, so does a company's soul. The room was still. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to stop. Daniel nodded once. I, Daniel Grant, vote against the Grand River Complex. If that costs me my seat, so be it. He sat down. McKinnon smiled faintly from across the room. Charles's face was stone. The votes were cast. One by one, the board members pressed their buttons. 5-4. For against. Charles straightened his tie. The motion passes. Then a voice interrupted. No, it doesn't. At the far end of the table, a man stood, gray-haired, thin, the former assistant of Albert Monroe. He raised his voting card. I cast my vote against. Mr. Monroe once told me, we build houses not just to shelter bodies, but to honor souls. I stand with Daniel Grant. The room erupted. The project was blocked by a single vote. Charles's smile vanished. He gathered his papers silently and left the room. Daniel sat still, breathing slowly. He felt no triumph, only the quiet weight of relief. That night, Daniel returned to his small apartment by the river. The rain had returned, steady and soft, tapping on the windows like a memory. He opened the curtains. Across the river, the workers' homes were still lit, warm, yellow squares of life untouched by greed. On his table lay a letter. The handwriting was familiar, Michael's. Dad, I'm proud of you. I was wrong to think strength meant wealth. I'm leaving my finance job. I want to work with you and the foundation. I want to learn what real strength looks like. Michael. Daniel read the letter twice, his vision blurring with tears. He looked out at the rain-soaked glass. Through the reflection, he could almost see Henry Grant's face, smiling gently. And beside him, Deborah, her eyes soft and kind, as if whispering, You did it, Danny. Dad, Deb. Daniel murmured, voice trembling but calm. We've kept the only thing that matters, our dignity. The clock ticked softly in the quiet room. Outside, the rain drew silver threads across the river. His old yellow taxi sat parked below, its faded paint glistening under the streetlight. Daniel walked down, opened the door, and sat in the driver's seat. He turned the key. The engine growled awake like an old friend. The radio came alive, an old crooner's voice from decades ago, singing the same song he'd heard the night he met Albert Monroe. You can start again, my friend. Daniel smiled. He placed his hands on the wheel and whispered, Yes, you always can. As long as you remember who you are. The cab rolled forward into the wet, glowing streets. An old man driving through a city that had once taken everything from him, now finally giving something back, peace. 10 years later, a thin veil of autumn mist hung over the river, soft and silver. Seagulls circled lazily above the water, dipping and rising as if tracing the memory of a city that had once lived in rain and time. At the corner of the riverside road stood a new building, brick red, elegant, solid as a promise kept. A bronze plaque at its entrance gleamed under the morning light. The Henry Grant Community Center, for the workers and families of Monroe Builders. In front of the building was a small monument, a statue of a man holding a hammer, looking upward. Carved into the stone beneath him were the words, Dignity is the foundation of every structure. Daniel Grant, now well into his 80s, stepped slowly out of his freshly polished yellow taxi. His back was slightly bent, his hair a gentle white halo in the sunlight. In his hands, a bouquet of white chrysanthemums, Deborah's favorite. Each step he took across the courtyard seemed to echo softly, not just in stone, but in memory. The hum of the city faded behind him, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the laughter of children from inside the center. Today marked 10 years since the founding of the Henry Grant Foundation. Inside the hall, workers, students, and families had gathered, faces bright, hands rough, eyes filled with gratitude. In the front row sat Michael and Evan, side by side. Both were older now, lines etched deep by time, but their eyes carried peace. When Daniel entered, the room rose as one, not for his title, but for the life he had lived. He nodded slightly, smiled, and made his way to the podium. His hands trembled as he adjusted the microphone. The hall fell into stillness. Many years ago, he began, voice soft but clear. My father, Henry Grant, told me something I didn't fully understand until now. He said, "What you build with your hands may crumble, but what you build with your conscience will last forever." He paused, eyes sweeping across the faces before him. Men, women, children, workers in dusty uniforms, young students clutching scholarship envelopes. Today, I know what he meant. Companies, money, even buildings, they change hands. But character is the only inheritance that no one can take, and no one can give unless we choose to live by it. He smiled faintly, his voice trembling just a little. I'm no hero. I'm just an old man who was lucky enough to meet someone who kept his word, and to live long enough to do the same. If you ask me what legacy truly means, I'd say it isn't 25% of a company. It's being able to look back and still hold your head high. The hall was silent for a moment, then applause swelled, gentle at first, then rising like a tide. Some stood, some wept quietly. Michael turned to Evan, squeezing his brother's shoulder. They didn't need words. The years of distance between them had already been crossed. After the ceremony, Daniel wandered the hall, stopping before the photo displays on the walls. Workers in hard hats, children receiving scholarships, newly built homes, smiling faces under sunlight. Each frame told a small story of hope, and together, they formed the portrait of a promise fulfilled. That afternoon, he drove to the riverbank where his father's old workshop had once stood. Now it was a small park, quiet and green, with benches facing the slow, glittering water. He parked the taxi, stepped out, and sat on the same bench he used to rest on years ago. The wind off the river was cool and tender, carrying a faint scent of metal and wood, the scent of work, of life. He placed the bouquet on the water and watched it drift away, petals turning gently in the current. Dad, he said softly, it's all right now. Albert kept his word. I did too. And now it's their turn, the next generation. I know they won't forget where every great building truly begins, in the heart of a working man. The wind whispered through the reeds, almost like a reply. Daniel looked down at the river and caught his own reflection, an old man's face, lined but calm, his eyes bright and clear. He smiled. From his coat pocket, he drew out a small, worn photograph. Deborah, still young, still laughing. I kept my promise, Deb, he murmured. I tried to live right, just like you said. He placed the photo beside him on the bench, leaned back, and closed his eyes. The afternoon light fell softly over him, wrapping him in warmth. To anyone passing by, he looked simply like an old man napping by the water, peaceful, content, as though dreaming of something beautiful. But Daniel Grant was not dreaming. He was finally resting, his journey complete. 3 months later, the Henry Grant Foundation held a memorial in his honor. The hall was full, workers, students, families, and friends. Michael stood at the podium, voice steady but filled with emotion. My father left quietly, the same way he lived. He used to say, we don't choose where we begin, but we can choose how we finish. And to finish with dignity is to have lived well. My brother and I promised to carry on his work, to keep this foundation alive, and to honor the faith that both our father and grandfather lived by. Justice may come late, but decency must come early. From the back of the hall, a young girl, a scholarship student, stepped onto the stage. She held the microphone with both hands, voice trembling but sincere. I never met Mr. Daniel, she said softly. But because of him, my father found work. And I get to go to school. Someday, I want to build houses strong enough that no one ever feels forgotten. Silence. Then applause rose again, gentle, rolling, like waves against the shore. At sunset, the city glowed golden. In the courtyard of the community center stood Daniel's old yellow taxi, lovingly preserved behind a small fence. Each year, on the anniversary of the foundation, volunteers cleaned and polished it. And at dusk, someone would place a single lantern inside. It would burn all night, its light flickering softly through the windshield. A small beacon for anyone still searching for a way home. Beyond the river, the sky turned crimson. If you listened closely as the wind moved through the streets, you might almost hear an old man's voice, calm and steady, carried by time. Life is only as long as a single ride, but if you drive it with honesty, every mile becomes forever.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. See you again.